Today we're going to talk about a kind of pollution that's quietly spread to, well, every corner of the globe. It's in our water, it's in our food, it's even in the air we're breathing right now. So we are going to make this invisible threat visible. Let's dive into the world of microplastics.
Kind of wild to think about, right? That something we can't even see could be such a huge risk. This is the central question we're really digging into today. All right, so let's get right into it and put this invisible invader under the microscope. What exactly are we dealing with here?
So here's our culprit. Microplastics are pretty much what they sound like. Teeny tiny plastic particles, smaller than 5 millimeters across. But here's the kicker. It's not just their size that's the problem. It's that they are insoluble. They don't dissolve. And that means they stick around in the environment for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years.
And when I say they're everywhere, I mean it. Seriously, everywhere. Scientists have found these things in the most remote places you can imagine, from the polar ice caps to the bottom of the deepest oceans. But maybe the most unsettling part? They've been found in our tap water. Yep, the water coming out of our own faucets.
So, if these little particles are showing up in Arctic snow and our kitchen sinks, that leads to the big question, right? Where is all this stuff coming from? Let's follow the plastic trail back to the source.
You know, the funny thing is, the vast majority of microplastics don't actually start out microscopic. They're the descendants of the much bigger plastic things we see and use every single day.
And this is basically how it happens. A plastic bottle or a grocery bag doesn't just biodegrade. Instead, the sun, the wind, the waves, they all just beat it up, breaking it into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. These are called secondary microplastics because they come from something bigger. That's different from primary ones, like those little microbeads they used to put in face scrubs, which were designed to be tiny from the get-go.
And yeah, this list really shows you just how much this is part of our everyday lives. We're not just talking about a plastic bottle someone tossed on the highway, we're talking about tiny fibers that come out of our clothes in the wash, little bits that wear off our car tires every time we drive, even flecks of paint coming off of buildings. It all adds up to this invisible flood.
Okay, so we know what they are and where they're coming from. Now for the next piece of the puzzle. How in the world do they make the jump from a piece of litter in the environment to our own dinner plates? Let's trace that path.
Okay, so take a look at this chart. It really breaks down how these plastics get into our water and, wow, the main culprit might surprise you. Look at that biggest slice. Almost half of the microplastics getting into our waterways come from wastewater. And that's mostly those tiny synthetic fibers from our clothes just washing down the drain with every load of laundry. You add in the runoff from roads and cities, and you've got a constant stream of plastic particles flowing right into the water we all depend on.
And you know, once these plastics are in the water, that's when they start climbing up the food chain. It's like a domino effect. It starts at the very bottom, with tiny plankton mistaking plastic for food. Then, small fish eat the plankton. Bigger fish eat the small fish, and the plastic gets more and more concentrated at every step, right up to us. But look, it's not just an ocean problem. When that contaminated water gets used for farming, those same plastics get into our soil and can even be taken up by the crops we eat.
So the key thing to get here is that this isn't just about what we eat and drink. That's a huge part of it for sure, but we can't ignore the air. We are literally breathing this stuff in, tiny airborne plastic particles from clothes, carpets, and city dust. In fact, scientists have now found these particles lodged deep inside human lung tissue.
Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. What is all this plastic actually doing to our health? Let's take a look at what the science can tell us so far. And, just as importantly, what it still can't.
Okay, so here's where things stand right now. In the lab, the evidence is pretty clear. When you expose human cells to microplastics, it can cause things like inflammation and cell damage. But, and this is a big but, translating those lab results to what happens in the real world, inside our bodies, is, well, it's really complicated. Scientists are still working to prove direct links to specific diseases and figure out what a lifetime of being exposed to low levels of this stuff really means for our health.
But it gets even more complicated. The plastic particle itself isn't the only problem we need to be thinking about. Think of these little plastic bits as tiny, toxic sponges, or even better, like tiny Trojan horses. Their surfaces just soak up other nasty pollutants from the environment, things like pesticides or heavy metals. So when we swallow or breathe in a plastic particle, we could also be getting a concentrated little dose of these toxic hitchhikers delivered deep into our bodies. Okay, I know, after hearing all that, it's really easy to feel, well, pretty overwhelmed. But we're not going to end on that note, because the story doesn't stop with the problem. It moves to the solutions, and there's actually a lot we can do.
And really, the solutions boil down to this two-pronged approach you see here. On one side, you have the big picture systemic stuff, making our wastewater treatment plants better so they can filter out these fibers, and just getting way smarter about how we manage waste. And then on the other side, you've got the actions we can all take as individuals that together make a huge difference. Choosing natural clothing fibers, using reusable bags and bottles, and supporting policies that push for these bigger changes.
And I think this quote just nails it. The problem is diffuse and chronic. It feels like it's everywhere, all the time. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. Our solutions can be focused and immediate. A single policy change or a big shift in our habits can start making a real impact right away.
And that's really what it all comes down to, isn't it? We've spent our time together making this invisible problem, well, visible. So the only question left for all of us is, now that we can see it, what are we going to do about it?